Welcome to the Madlik podcast. My name is Jeffrey Stern, and as always at Madlik, we will try to shed a little light, maybe light a spark about a Jewish text, a Jewish tradition, and maybe illuminate the current events, the matzav that we are in today. This is a little more than a week after the elections here in the United States, and as Rabbi Joel Simons has noted, it's kind of the end of Shiva. And he writes, as Judaism teaches, after 7 days of Shiva, we stand up, we emerge from the dark. We do not have to accept, we do not have to move on, but we stand up. So today we emerge from the darkness. We are taught that the righteous do not complain of the darkness, but rather create light. Today we begin to create light, and we do so as the resistance, and we fight and fight and fight for good, for love, and for justice. So in its small way, Madlik will hope to provide a little bit of that light. I'd like to start by thanking my friend Noah, who complimented me on the podcast of last week and shared it with his friends and his family. Noah, you don't know how much it means to me that someone who has such an amazing podcast would give me that compliment. Thank you so much. In the portion that we read this week, we have the story of Abraham and his campaign to save Sodom. He tries, but he fails. He doesn't come up with the votes. The numbers are just not there. So let's listen to the story of Sodom and Abraham's valiant efforts to achieve success. Try to see how Jewish tradition understood Sodom and understood the lessons to be learned. So sit back, buckle your seatbelts, leave your low-sodium diets behind. Listen to the story of Abraham's lost election. So we all know the story of Sodom, an evil city. Lot lived there with his family, his wife and his daughters. And the angels who had just recently told Abraham and Sarah that they would have a miraculous birth of a son came down to Sodom and were staying in Lot's house. And a crowd gathered outside, demanding that he throw out his visitors. They wanted to sodomize them. So more evil than that one could not imagine. And God decides that he will have to judge Sodom. And he starts by saying, "Shall I hide from Abraham that which I am doing? Seeing that Abraham shall surely become a great and mighty nation, and all the nations of the earth shall be blessed in him. And for I have known him to the end, that he may command his children and his household after him, that they may keep the way of the Lord, to do righteousness and justice, to the end that the Lord may bring upon Abraham that which he hath spoken of him." So God decides that he can't hide this from Abraham. And sure enough, when he tells Abraham of what he plans to do, Abraham argues. And here the Abraham who last week showed us that he was the other starts to showcase the traits that will make him not only an Ivri, but also a Yisrael, someone who strives with God. And Abraham says, is it possible that the God of justice will act unjustly? Chalila lacha, hashofet kal haaretz, lo ya'aseh mishpat. Will you sweep away the good along with the evil? If we can find a critical mass of good people, won't you save Sodom? And we all know the argument. If you find 50, will you save them? 40? What about 30? 20? Ultimately, Abraham knows he has to stop at 10. According to Jewish tradition, 10 represents the core, the minimal critical mass that you need to create a community and ultimately to change the larger community. It's why when Jews pray, they need 10. That and, of course, the fact that when Joshua were sent out to spy on the land, to scout the land, to look for opportunity, and 10 of the spies came back with a negative, small-minded, weary, and timid report. The land was not to be conquered. So 10 is the minimum of a critical mass. And ultimately, Abraham didn't have the numbers. He lost the election. Sodom was destroyed. The context of Abraham is always provided by the classical commentaries. He's always compared to Noah. Noah walked with God. Et ha-Elohim hithalech Noach. But Abraham walked in front of God. Asher hithalachti lefanav. And Rashi and the classical commentators all comment, had Noah been in the days of Abraham, he wouldn't have been such a big deal. And of course, we all know the image that the Dubna Magid brings to explain this contrast between these two leaders. And the picture that the Dubna Magid provides us is a Tzadik in Peltz. A Tzadik, a righteous man, who wears a fur coat. There are 2 ways to heat a room. You can put on a fur coat, or you can go and get some wood and kindling and light a fire. The one keeps you warm and saves your butt, and the other saves you and your other. But what isn't so obvious from this comparison between these 2 figures is that we all think when we read the story of the flood that God makes a rainbow and says, I'll never destroy mankind again, that he's finished with that. But the truth is, there are many themes in Genesis. There's themes of the barren mother, themes of sibling rivalry, themes of the rejected firstborn. But the theme of God giving up and destroying the world also has at least 2 occurrences. One is with Noah, where his world is destroyed, and one is with Lot and Sodom, where his world is destroyed. Both stories end in an identical fashion, and we'll get to that later. But they start with God giving up, regretting he ever created humanity. The Hebrew Bible loves to play with words, and the word that the Bible uses to describe God's regret for creating mankind is Vayinachem Adonai, normally translated as he repented. But Vayinachem comes from the same word as Noach, as Menucha, as rest. God grew weary of man. And he grew weary of man in the first chapters of Genesis. Those of us who have ever heard a parent say they regretted giving birth to us once will probably be in therapy the rest of our lives. And here the people of the book, in reading their book, find at least 2 instances where God grows weary of mankind. And so to walk with God, as Noah does, is to share with God that sentiment, giving up, yiush in mankind. And Abraham not only struggles with God, but I suggest that he struggles against the weariness. And that is the story of Abraham losing the election of Sodom. So let's see, at least in rabbinic Judaism and the classical texts, what was the sin of Sodom, and what was the reason or the lesson to be learned from Abraham not being able to save Sodom. So what was the evil of Sodom? So the obvious critique of Sodom would be sexual depravity. These people had no morals. But that's not what the rabbis did. The rabbis talked about Midat Sodom, the characteristic of Sodom. They actually codified a concept called Midat Sodom that permitted the court to enforce rulings based on acting not like the people of Sodom. And what is the Midat Sodom? Here's the rabbi's amazing expression. Ze nehena v'ze lo chaser. You have a situation where someone, another, has the ability to enjoy, and you lose nothing by permitting that enjoyment. If you don't permit that enjoyment, the pursuit of life, liberty, and happiness of the other, you are guilty of Midat Sodom. The rabbis give an example. So for instance, let's say you had a shack and you had absolutely no intention of renting that shack out. It was vacant. And let's say a vagrant came and took over the shack. And that vagrant had absolutely no interest in looking for a rental property. He wasn't a potential customer, and you are not a potential landlord. If you try to kick him out of that shack, you are guilty of Midat Sodom, the characteristics of Sodom. This person is enjoying the benefits of your shack, and you wish to kick him out, and it doesn't cost you anything to permit him to stay there. Now, the modern rendition of that, I believe, is truly life, liberty, and happiness. And no one has said it better, to my mind, than Michael Moore in a new movie called Trumpland. So I'll let Michael say it for himself.
But what I say to people who are against abortion is, if you are against it, don't have one.
Don't have it.
if you are against gay marriage, don't get gay married. You won't like it. It's not for you, you know. But live and let live.
Thanks, Michael. Let me translate that to my friends and co-religionists in Israel. If you don't want to have an egalitarian prayer service at the Kotel, don't have it. But don't stop other people from expressing and experiencing their Judaism. You're a woman, you don't want to hold the Torah, you don't want to read from the Torah, you don't want to put on a talit, you don't want to wear tefillin, don't do it. Guess what? It won't do anything for your prayers. But my God, why would you stop others in expressing their religiosity in that way? Zenehena v'zeh lo chaser. You're acting like a sodomite. Want to take a bus on Shabbat? Don't take a bus on Shabbat. But someone wants to visit their elderly mother and father. They want to gather with their family in the next town. They want to visit their aging grandparent on a Shabbat. They want to take the Egged bus. What's it to you? What's it off your back? Zenehena v'zeh lo chaser. You have very stringent laws of conversion. You don't actually accept anybody else's laws anyway. So let other Jews welcome into the Jewish fold and the Jewish people those who want to become a part of the Jewish people. If their child wants to marry your child, let them reconvert, but don't stop them from living a full life as a Jew in Israel or anywhere as they see it. Zenehena v'zeh lo chaser. So what is the takeaway from Sodom? What do we learn from the fact that we lost Sodom? That Abraham didn't have the numbers and lost the election. Clearly, if you don't have a minyan, if you don't have the minimal amount of community to affect change, we all go down together. You need the critical mass. In the first chapter of Pirkei Avot, the 7th Mishnah, really early on, we learn from Nitai the Arbelite, a rabbi who we know nothing else about besides this statement. He would say, distance yourself from a bad neighbor. Do not cleave to a wicked person, and do not abandon belief in retribution. The rabbis understood that ultimately we are all in the same boat, and that if we cannot affect change amongst our neighbors, and we have wicked neighbors, we all go down. In the words of another Mishnah, Oy l'rasha v'oy l'shcheno. Woe is to the evil person, and woe is to his neighbor. Don't abandon belief in retribution. The Hebrew is V'al tityaesh min paraniot. Don't despair from punishment. There's a difference in the commentaries. Some say Don't despair that the wicked will ultimately get their due. They'll be punished. Or don't despair of the hard times that you will have to suffer in order to stay true to who you are. Whatever the case, the key is not to despair, to keep fighting. This belief of the rabbis that the environment, the neighbors, the community that one lives within has an immense effect on one's life is part of the core beliefs of Judaism. It's so core that not only does it appear very early on in the ethics of the fathers in Pirkei Avot, but it also appears very early in the daily morning prayers. After we thank God for giving us sight, for letting us stand on our own legs, for waking us up in the morning, we say a powerful prayer. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam. Blessed are you, our God, King of the universe, who takes sleep from her eyes. Keep us far from a bad man and a bad companion. Help us attach ourselves to the good instinct and to good deeds. V'harchikenu me'adam ra u'mechaver ra, v'dabkenu b'yetzer hatov. The liturgy goes on to add a piece of Talmud from the tractate of Barachot. Yehi ratzon milfanecha Adonai Elohai v'Elohei avotai, shetatzilenu hayom b'chol yom, ma'azei panim em'azut panim, me'adam ra u'mechaver ra u'meshachen ra. May it be your will, Lord, my God and God of my ancestors, to save me today and every day from the arrogant and from arrogance itself, from a bad man, a bad friend, a bad neighbor, a bad mishap, a destructive adversary, a harsh trial, and a harsh opponent, whether or not he is a son of the covenant. Ben shehu ben berit, u ben she'eno ben berit. It's the first time in the morning liturgy that we make no distinction between Jew and non-Jew. Clearly the rabbis would want us to move away from a bad community. But what happens if we, like Noah or like Lot, live in a world where we have no choice to leave? By leaving, we leave behind everything. We have only ourselves. I think the lesson is clear. It's incumbent upon us to change our neighborhood, to change our family, to change our neighbor, to work to change the numbers. And I think that's the lesson that the rabbis took away from Abraham's laws, that when we have no choice, we have to work hard to change our communities and the world that we live in, because we are truly in the same boat. Oy l'rasha v'oy l'shcheno. There's one other place where Sodom is mentioned in the halacha, in Jewish law. When one finishes a meal, there is a custom. Now it's a custom. It used to be a requirement that one wash one's hands. One washes one's hands at the beginning of the meal, but at the end of the meal, after one has eaten and one is satiated, v'achalta v'savata, one has to wash one's hands, and in the words of the Talmud, to wash off the Melech Sadomit, the salt of Sodom. Clearly, this had to do with how salt was used to preserve meat and food. And the Talmud goes on to say, because if one doesn't wash the salt of Sodom off one's hands, one might touch one's eyes, one might go blind. The Musonics, the Hasidim, took this verse in a much more profound manner. And they said, after you've eaten and after you've been satisfied, you have to wash off the salt of Sodom, the salt of a community that cared not for the other, that never tried to walk a mile in the shoes and the footsteps of the other. You cannot blind yourself to the matzav, the situation of others. So you have to wash off the Melech Sadomit before you can truly bless God and say Birchat Hamazon. My favorite podcast is the Promise Podcast. It's produced in Tel Aviv at TLV1.FM. And a recent episode after the election was entitled what does the election mean to us? And the most profound comment was made by one of the podcasters who said it's not what we need to learn from the fall of the liberal community in America. It's what they need to learn from us. Because for over 10 years, the liberal community in Israel has been protesting in Kikar Rabin, in the square where Rabin was assassinated, and basically preaching to themselves. And now, in America, people are taking to the streets in New York, in Portland, in the heart of liberal America. And my concern is that just as the left in Israel has basically been living in an echo chamber and has not been doing almost anything to win at the ballot box, to go out into the periphery and change hearts and minds, to talk about the evils of the occupation, not so much in moral elitist terms, but in terms of security, in terms of the corrosive nature of living as an overlord to another people. So too, now that the left in America has lost the executive and the Congress, it would be too easy for them to fall into the same trap as the left in Israel and simply preach to themselves. It seems to me that the concept and the metaphor of the Tzadik in Peltz, of the righteous man cocooned and warmed in his own fur coat, is not so much physical warmth, but moral integrity. It's too easy to wrap ourselves in our own ideology and our own moral integrity, to coddle ourselves and to think of the dumb rednecks, the white male who hasn't graduated college, who voted for Trump. But it seems to me that the lesson that the rabbis are teaching us, and that ultimately Abraham is teaching us, is that we have to go out and get the firewood and kindle it and try first and foremost to understand the electorate. After we digest our wonderful beliefs and opinions, we dare not be blind to the opinions and the beliefs and the sense of loss and irrelevance that the masses who voted, the over 50% of the electorate who voted for Trump, feel. Because then we will be blinded by the Melech Sadomit. So how do the stories of both Noah and Lot end? They end with a man naked, shedding all of his clothing, and drunk. In the case of Noah, his children cover him up and go on to create a world. In the case of Lot, he's in his cave. His two daughters believe that the whole world has been destroyed, and they get him drunk, and they sleep with him. And the older daughter has a child, a son, who she calls Moab, Meh from the father. And as any student of Jewish genealogy will know, the Israelites have an ambivalent relationship with Moab. But ultimately, it's Ruth, the Moabite, who gives birth to the dynasty of David, which represents ultimate salvation and redemption. So both stories end in Yi'ush, in despair, but they both contain within them a spark, a glimmer of a brighter future. So yes, we have to be like Abraham, a Yisrael, who struggles with God, who struggles with ideas, who struggles with reality and tries to make it better. But we have to make sure that we don't end up alone on a boat or in a cave, puffed up, talking into our own echo chamber, convincing ourselves that we are right. We have to get off the boat, we have to leave the cave, and we have to make all of our fellow man understand and appreciate what is good in all of us. We have to encourage all of our fellow man to live and let live, to let every human being pursue life, liberty, and justice, and happiness. We can't grow weary, we have to be strong, and we have to believe that we can change mankind and ultimately the electorate, one person, one voice at a time. At Matlik, we always close with a song, and this week we will close with Psalm 34, Mi ha'ish hechofetz chaim. Who is the man that desires life and loveth his days, that he may see good? Keep your tongue from evil, and your lips from speaking guile. Depart from evil and do good. Seek peace and pursue it.
מי האיש החפץ חיים? מי האיש החפץ חיים? אוהב ימים, אוהב ימים, אוהב ימים, לראות טוב, עוד פעם אותו דבר. חפץ חיים, אוהב ימים, אוהב ימים, לראות טוב, נצור לשונך מרע, נצור לשונך מרע, ושפתיך מדבר מרמה. סור מרע, עשה טוב, בקש שלום, ורודפהו עוד פעם, נצור לשונך, נצור לשונך מרע, ושפתיך מדבר מרמה. סור מרע, עשה כשלום ורודפהו. מההתחלה, מי האיש? נסו לבד. מי האיש החפץ חיים, אוהב ימים, אוהב ימים, לראות טוב. מי האיש